My humble respect to Guru Mahan, Guru Piran Sangran, Guru Piranyo, fellow Jnanis. I'm going to continue today the Katha Upanishad. This is the last chapter. And the last time we spoke about how, for one to truly realize one's true state of existence, the pure state of understanding of who we are, that self, or, the fragment of that, divine force. I mean, we have the gross body, the mind, and so on, the layers. And for us to really understand this, we need to understand the different states of our existence. So in the last class, we covered how about the sensory organs and, how when the sensory organs are weak, we have good cognition of this material world, we experience everything. And when that sensory organs go to sleep, we see that, the whole material identity disappears. So here, in the last satsang, I spoke about how in this Upanishad it speaks about how a person knows the self is independent of the sensory organs. And if one knows this, you see that one is not affected by all those, experiences of the material world through these sensory organs. And the Upanishad says that you no longer become susceptible to the sorrows or the sukha dukkha cycles or the birth death cycles. So today I'm going to go into a little bit more in depth with a little bit more to go through that layers very carefully, because this is very important, because it helps us to understand the gross body, the senses, the mind, and then how to make that inner journey through meditation, introspection, contemplation, reflection, and meditation to that ultimate supreme, state of our existence. So here, Lord Yama explains to Nachiketa layer by layer of what our personality is. So we are on page 166, and this is verse 7, which he explains here, that he says that the mind is superior to the sensory organs. So if you see on the bottom, we have all our sensory organs, or what we call the indriyas. And this is something that we get all our information from the material world, from the external world, to our brain and our mind, and ultimately we give, the experiences and the thoughts, the memories, and all those comes through these 5 channels. And here there is a layer or a hierarchy that one experiences. So the gross body, the sensory organs that brings that information, it's imprinted on the mind. And he says that, the mind, is able to capture this information. And in this, it says that it is the coordinator of all the thoughts and emotions and desires based on the experiences of this material world. Hence, it says that the mind is much more superior to these sensory organs. Sensory organs are more grosser. So it's explaining that, this options that we have to, make decisions, our feelings and emotions, the memories and imaginations, and the restlessness and the changeful things that happens to us, our personality, he says, all takes place in the mind. So what was gross now is getting more and more, subtle. And he says that superior, so this mind is much more superior to the sensory organs, right? So we're going to go from the gross to the most subtle. Then he explains that while the mind experiences all this, there is something called the buddhi, or the intellect. That is much more superior to the mind, because that's the faculty of discrimination, ability to differentiate between what is temporary and what is permanent. So it helps us in our decision-making process. And this is what ultimately leads us to clarity of thought and also that wisdom. So this notion of discrimination, viveka, ability to know what is real and unreal, what is permanent and impermanent, right? And this is the faculty that essentially is responsible for that. It's about acquiring knowledge, reasoning, ability to discern things and make judgments and decisions. And this is what guides the mind. The intellect guides the mind. Sometimes the mind is pulled in a particular direction, but the intellect guides you, that's not what we're going to do. We should take this path. So you see that, so the buddhi or the intellect is much more superior to that mind. Then he goes on to one more layer, which is essentially what he calls this great self, or the Hiranyagarbha, the cosmic intelligence that is embedded in our DNA, you see, which is subtle creator. That's what makes our body form in this way, and that's what gives us color, and that's what, things that are imprinted in our DNA, right? He says that that subtle creator, is what he calls the total mind of the creator. And this is what they call cosmic intelligence. And I give examples of that, where nobody teaches us to breathe when we come out of our mother's womb. And there is some intelligence that makes us gasp that first breath. And there are so many things that we do that is driven by this intelligence until our own intelligence takes over. So there is a sense of, order and harmony in this design. And this is what great saints say, that this is the source of our mind and our life, right? This Hiranyagarbha, what we call the subtle self. So it is much more superior to that intellect, right? And he goes on to saying that, and the purpose of this meditational process, later on I'll talk about that inner journey, is to transcend that, the sensory organs, the indriyas. It becomes quiet. The mind, you understand the mind process, and you're able to quieten that, and you're able to have that clarity of thought because the mind is less noisy. And as the buddhi also becomes quietened, one experiences a phenomenal feeling in the deep meditation of that one with that cosmic intelligence. And he goes on to saying, even that is not the final destination. He says, beyond all this, he says there is an unmanifest. This is the formless, dimensionless, timeless substratum that we get in. This is the ultimate state of this meditational pathway, right? So one who's practicing meditation, whatever meditation, you see that in the deep self-realization process, you experience that unmanifest, not touched by time, space, and anything else. So this is what they call the transcendent or transcendental experience. And you see that, those who are practicing meditation, you get that exhilaration of the transcendental nature. If you're practicing it long enough, you know what I'm speaking about. This is what great saints speak about too, that kind of state of liberation, right? That, feeling that you are not this material identity, you transcend that space-time continuum, right? So it says it's beyond space and time and causation. This, you experience this, in the sense that your mind is absolutely quiet. That means the material identity is absolutely not there, and you get that amazing, amazing experience, right, in the deep meditation state, right? And this is what he says, that, in that state, the sukha dukkha cycles disappear, the birth death cycles disappear, and you are, truly in that ultimate state of existence. And you see that the whole form, disappears. And this is what and this is why sometimes people sit in this meditative state. They can sit for a very long time because they have transcended the space and time. So he says that when you come to the state, you will experience that substratum that is not affected by space and time, birth and death. Remember, the original question that Nachiketa had is what happens after death, right? As long as you are in that state one, which is the mind, you're always oscillating between, you know, being aware of the material state and not being aware. And you're worried what happens after death. The same thing, the buddhi is so caught up with analyzing the material world, but hasn't gone deeper to understand that self. Right? So even at the buddhi level, you may have a theoretical knowledge of it, but you don't have that experiential knowledge. And as you push further and further, those theoretical knowledge transforms into experiential, an experience of the transcendental nature. And those who practice this meditation, you see the sense of serenity is there even though while they're awake. So in this, Lord Yama is explaining the different layers of why their mind is unsettled, why they are unable to understand birth and death, because they're still caught up in this lower state of existence. The moment they attain that unmanifest state, right? They talk about nirvana, kalpa, and all those things. When one attains that state, one realizes that you are transcendental to the body. Between car, you have a vehicle, but the driver and the vehicle are not the same thing. The driver is separate, the vehicle is separate. At the same time, that unmanifests and the manifestation of this material identity right up to the body is very different. So he explains this layers that is present in all of us, but because we don't have that knowledge to break through from the material identity, except in deep sleep. And now he says that you can experience that state even in another state called the deep meditation state. So again, this here. See, so here he explains this. Then he goes on to talk about in the next state, which is essentially the state where, he says that in the next passage on 8, he explains that cosmic self or the Brahman. He says that when one experiences that, one attains that all-pervasive state, that formless. That is why it's very important. Great saints and sages say that allocate time for yourself every day to get into that state through this deep meditation, that cosmic self or the Brahman state. You feel that all-pervasive formless state. Right? He explains that, He says that in that state, if anyone knows it, he becomes liberated from the cycle of birth and death and attains that immortality. So while you're still in this material world, you are not touched by this material world. And that is why meditation is not just, half an hour a day. That half an hour a day must enable your mind to experience that cosmic self or the Brahman and carry that through out your day. And so there is a way that one can be engaged in this material world, but yet be at the cosmic level, right? So here he explains this very clearly, but in the early stages of meditation, you see that this is very difficult. They meditate, even during the meditation state becomes not easy. The mind is, roaming everywhere. But as one intensifies the practice, you start getting the glimpses of that cosmic self, maybe a few seconds. And that prolongs and prolongs and prolongs. So in a meditation of 20 minutes, you probably get about 5 minutes. That expands until 20 minutes. And when one expands to the 20 minutes, and then after you come out, when you start introspecting, contemplating, reflecting for another 15 to 20 or 30 minutes, you are there, but You're still in that cosmic self state. And then with that state, you have your shower and do everything else. While you're meandering in this material world, the mind is still anchored. It's on an autopilot, anchored on that cosmic self. So it experiences that all pervasiveness that you experience, and you see that the kind of things that you see is that you may have a plant in your house and you see that the plant is more greener. So there's a higher level of magnification because of that oneness with everything, oneness with nature. You see that the trees are swinging before, and now you can feel the dance, right? So he says that that Purusha, you start experiencing the all-pervasive nature of the Purusha, the formless, sometimes you're just in a state of, absorbed in that state. Sometimes you're just sitting down and you're in a state of absorption, right? You understand things better, that all, not just knowing from an empirical perspective, that you become more realized. You feel that inner awakening within you, that oneness from inside, right? And finally, you actually experience your true nature. What does that mean? It is actually you feel the reverberation of your own conscious being. They call it Sachidananda state, the substratum where Sat Chit Ananda, and that oneness with that divine force, and you feel that amazing, blissful happiness. Swamiji used to say, Summa irukum sugam. Right? So you see that as the mind transcends from that sensory organs to that ultimate state, you experience this, feel all oneness. That this is where you read, when you experience that, when you read Rumi or when you read all the other, you can see that, hey, I experience that the whole universe is within me, right? So one gets the glimpses of that experience. And its nature is that you feel infinite potential and possibilities, and you get amazing, amazing ideas of this material world that we live in, right? And you experience it throughout, you know, all your state of your existence, and you're always in that connected state. And you realize that in everything that's self. And what is really wonderful is you feel very peaceful, blissful state, that transcendental nature, right? So here it is says that, in this he says to attain this path of realization, you cannot do this by academic understanding or theoretical things. You actually have to do it and experience it. He says that, that to be able to discriminate what is real and unreal. So that introspection is really important. Everyday introspection, contemplation, reflection, and the deep meditation. That leads to the pure mind, right? And you see that the mind, remember I said about the buddhi becomes gravitate towards that experiential learning of the form and the formless, and it attains that wisdom. And you see this in all the scriptures, every scripture, whether it's Hindu scripture, Christian scripture, Buddhist scripture, all of them speak about this. When you experience, that's why when you open all of those books, you understand because you have attained that connection, right? And the meditation now helps you to go inward. So this is why introspection, contemplation, reflection, only then meditation becomes much more easier to make that inward journey. Now, once that happens, then you start getting the glimpses of the Purusha, the glimpses of your true nature. And ultimately, it leads you to the peaceful liberation state. This is what this passage is telling us. What's the benefit of this? He says that you get freedom from fear and sorrow. Many people have a lot of demons in their mind. All that disappears, dissipate. You become free of the karmas, the bondages. You live a life of wisdom, compassion, joy. There's a lot of gratitude. You have tremendous, tremendous appreciation for life. And you see the self in everything, in everyone, in every being, in everything that comes, that your senses captures, right? And this is what this passage is telling us, that it is actually, if you are able to push yourself from the gross senses right up to the next level through intensive practice, patience, perseverance, persistence, and practice every day. Most people give it up, right? When you practice this, when you slowly transcend, you feel that amazing, amazing connectivity. So here he says that the promise is that, if anyone knows it, he is liberated from the cycle of birth and death. Now, this is already giving him glimpses of the first question he asked: what happens after death? Right? He attains immortality even while living. So you're not affected by the changes of the body. As a matter of fact, the body becomes more and more alert and more attuned to the mind that is anchored on that cosmic self. So ultimately, you see that it's an amazing way of living. You get amazing ideas. Right? So this is what this passage is so loaded with. It says that as one gravitates, the Purusha gets closer and closer, right? And you see that farther than the farthest, furthest dwells in the heart of all beings. So it may seem very far, but actually it's one of the closest things with us. He says that when you realize that, you become free. When I was practicing this, for more than over 45 years, the 15th year or 16th year, this experience, he says, I'm searching for the divinity in God. And suddenly the mind realized that actually, if it's all pervasive, then you get that all pervasive for a split of a second, and then suddenly your mind explores that experience and say, if that all pervasive divinity I experience, then the closest distance is not in a abode far away from me, it's an abode within me. And bang, you have that eureka moment that, the closest distance that divinity is, that's zero distance from us. Right? We don't need to travel anywhere. We don't need to search anywhere. It's just making that inward journey. Right? That is why Swamiji says that, yata tatparate, he kept trying and trying, he said, ipparamam, apparamam, he said, I observed here within me and outside me, ega paraparamam, the entire cosmos I discovered within me. The inner cosmos and the external cosmos are one. It is reflection because my mind is fragmented. When the mind is unified, the mind becomes one. When the mind becomes universal, it is all pervasive. And this is beautifully stated by Mahan. So when one gets the glimpses and you introspect Swamiji's teachings or the Katha Upanishad, boom, the eureka moment happens for you. Right? And this is what, for me, was one of the most enlightening moments. And then he goes on to explain in this next passage, he talks about the cosmic self, the Purusha, that one experience. So you realize it's not an object of a vision. It's not something you cannot objectify. It's a subjective experience. It says you can't see it with the eyes because the eye sees objects in the form of radiation and so on. But that's beyond that, it's transcendental. So you will not be able to see with your gross senses. He says it only reveals itself when the mind is pure and constantly thinks of it. So the mind is absence of this materiality. And that's what the whole introspection, contemplation, reflection, meditation is to teach us that, to quieten the mind down so that our bandwidth is much more higher and we're able to pick up the most subtlest of the subtlest. And he explains that in that state, the mind attains that pure, when they mean pure in absence of all the material thoughts, right? And it attains that eureka moment I spoke about. See, he says one becomes immortal. So very clearly in this chart, it shows that the cosmic self Purusha cannot be seen by the eyes, because it's about our physical sight that is trying to capture those radiation. so it's an energy field which is from the material realm. You cannot hear it, right? It is subtler than the sound. See, you cannot smell it. It's subtler than the fragrance, right? You cannot taste it because it's subtler than the taste buds that can pick up. And you cannot touch it is because it is beyond any tangible objects. So when we try to objectify the divinity, we miss it. We don't get it, right? So he says that it is not an object. It is the seer, the hearer, and the knower of all, right? So, and he says that how to realize this, one needs to purify the mind. And this is where you see that, you know, through truthful, righteous self-control, compassion, and detachment, or that divinizing everything in our lives, right? Not being overly, caught. Yes, we have duties in this material world, but we don't get overly caught up by it. That focus is so important, that focus not on the external, but on the cosmic self, and that intensity of experiencing that cosmic self in every facet of our lives, not just in meditation, right? So that true noko, the intensity must be in everything that we do. And when we do that, there's a sense of kind of something happens in our heart, the seat of our, understanding and experience. The mind becomes pure and steady, right? And ultimately, you experience that, aha, that I am that within your own, realm of understanding. And you see that ultimately you realize it properly. You experience that with completeness, in a wholesome way, in a direct way, without any, unwavering clarities. So the Swamiji said, Arivin, Arival, Arivin Tili, with the clarity becomes so profound. So as we practice this, our mind becomes more and more refined to be able to catch that wind of that divinity, right? Like how a sailboat guys know how to learn the wind and know how to catch it. The mind becomes so refined to catch that wind of the divinity or the Purusha. And when one does that, one becomes immortal. And that means, what it means is that you break the cycle of birth and death, and that transitory nature of life. One attains that eternality even while living. And that's the wonderful part, is that while you are in this mortal body, the mind is immortal. While you are in a finite, realm, you attain that infiniteness. While you are in a perishable vessel, you experience that imperishability. And this is the beauty that one gets, that your mind does not get perturbed by it. So again, in this passage, he says that the self cannot be seen as an object, but it's a light, by which seeing, hearing, and knowing are possible. So that is what illumines everything in this material world, in space and time and without space and time. And this is what this great scripture is teaching. When one understands this, and deep meditation, when you're practicing meditation, not just closing your eyes and you start getting that quietude, you transition from the gross to a more subtle and subtle, ultimately attaining the transcendentality. It doesn't happen in a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks. It happens relentlessly as we practice for many years, and one fine day, boom, you'll gradually get it in one fine day. It all makes sense. And this is what this scripture is telling and taking. Lord Yama is taking Nachiketa through these different layers, because Nachiketa asks him, that there is this abode that is transient, and what happens after death? That's the question. And Lord Yama is explaining to him, actually, death is an illusion, because you are the transcendental state that is transcend birth and death. But why is it that people don't get it? Is because they're caught up in the different layers of awareness from the gross. And as long as you're in the gross or semi-gross or whatever, you would not experience the wholesomeness of the transcendental nature, the transcendentality of our being. And this is what he says, that, one needs to really practice, be patient, be persistent, and the perseverance is really, really important. And when you attain that, you see that it becomes so much more easier. The windows and the doors of the universe opens up, and you have amazing level of creativity, and the poetry of the divinity guides you in everything that you do, whether your research work or whether you're writing, whether you're mathematics or whether your music, or playing instrument. The flow just comes through beautifully. The divine flute starts playing and guides us in many, many ways. So this is what Lord Yama is explaining to Nachiketa. Sandosham. So next class, I'll go a little bit more deeper, and then ultimately I'll close out this chapter on what was the learning and from this scripture, and ultimately what's the kind of a philosophy and how we translate that philosophy into practice to really live a wonderful and amazing and inspirational life. Sandosham.